Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Success Without Sacrifice show. Today, we're talking about how you can thrive in a male dominated environment without becoming one of the boys. Stay tuned. All right, we are back. I'm Kate Byers, and I'm with Jadine Cleary, our Director of Performance Coaching at the Good Life Institute. And today, we are talking about how you can operate and succeed in a male-dominated culture starting today without becoming one of the boys or behaving like the guys or feeling that working in a male-dominated culture is going to be, really tough. So we want you to be congruent and enjoying your success. So welcome, Jadine. Glad that you're here.
It's such an important topic, Kate, and thank you for introducing us to it. Because to your point, if we feel like we need to be inauthentic with who we are in order to be successful, it's not going to be sustainable.
Right.
And not only will it not be sustainable, it's not going to be as effective because we feel like we're actually playing by somebody else's rules.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, that's so good. Because, I think this topic is going to be really relevant to our audience because you might be, a female attorney swimming upstream in a very traditional, male law practice. You might be a woman in tech. Like we work with a lot of women in tech, Microsoft, Dell, Amazon, right? Trying to get your voice heard in a field that simply attracts more men than women. Or like doctors, we work with a lot of doctors who are in these arenas where stereotypically, men are the doctors, women are the support staff. A lot of women who are joining, the executive boards. Like it's great to see more women at the executive realm and joining the leadership teams. But again, predominantly those are male dominated environments. So a lot of our listeners are working in situations that are dominated by the other sex. And this makes sense because the higher up you go in your career, the fewer women you see, and you have fewer role models and fewer people who get you and understand, what it's like to be a woman in leadership. So this is going to be a great topic. Let's jump right in to where we want to start, which is what not to do. And I think this is just a really important piece because we can't just talk about what we're doing. We have to be aware of the behaviors we don't want to exhibit, right? And so the very first thing that I want to share that we don't want to do is we don't want to try to be like the guys. And I made this mistake a lot in my career. For example, as I was coming up into the executive realm, I saw a lot of men talking and they would be talking about like guy subjects, whatever. And so I would walk in the room and I would talk about the stock market or I would try to talk about sports, which honestly, I don't care about sports. If you do, that's awesome. Then talk about it. But it was like I tried to really stay away from talking about, like my little girl, like, oh, that's too soft, Kate. Don't be the mommy in the room. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's like, that's not really authentic to who I am because like at that point in my life, being a single parent and being a mom and doing those things was like really, really key to me. The other thing we see women doing is trying to be, just attitudinally more like guys. Like I need to be brash. I need to be abrupt. We have all these stereotypes of like how men behave. And while that can be very true that men can act that way, as a woman trying to be the person who comes in and acts like the dude, it just doesn't really land because the guys are like, well, why are you acting this way? And it doesn't mean that I think as women, for example, if swearing is part of your vernacular and that's something you do, cool, then walk in and swear. Just be like, because a lot of men are known for swearing in the workplace, right? And we're not going to get off on a topic of whether that's okay or not. But then do that. But if that's not who you are, you don't need to try to blend in to what's going on in the room. I've had clients before who have said, Kate, how do I? We had a client. I love this story because we had a client once who was sort of like, she goes, I'm 5 foot tall. I've just, come into the boardroom with all of these like 6 foot tall guys. She goes, I'm brown, I'm Indian. They're all for the most part, white. How do I be more like them? And I'm like, well, you don't be like them. I said, you be you. And what you need to do is help them and yourself feel the value of who you are as a 5 foot brown skinned Indian woman who has brought her power into this boardroom.
Yeah, Kate, it's exactly what you're talking about. And I remember too, once going to coach a global sales team in Chicago, and it was all a bunch of guys. and I was the only woman. And my colleague at the time was a guy, and he'd played golf with all these guys many, many times. He'd been drinking well past midnight. Who knows what they talked about? And here I was feeling like I'm coming in as the goody two shoes and the woman. And what was so interesting is the guys were polite to me, but none of them looked at me.
Mm.
And if I wouldn't have been aware enough as to my true value and what I knew I could bring to this group by being myself, I would have been completely put off center because I'd be wondering about what it is that's wrong with me.
Yeah.
And funny enough, from getting to know these guys more once I did, it was more how uncomfortable they were with knowing how to be with me than it had anything to do with me.
Oh, Jadine, I'm so glad you said that. You know what? I actually had someone, and at the time, I was so insulted by this. I actually had a boss once who told me that I was intimidating the men on the executive floor. Like most of those guys were a level above me. I was sort of like a junior or just coming into the executive realm. And he was like, can you just chill out on like telling everyone about, and trying to be so smart? He's like, we're intimidated by you. Like they wanted to talk about like, fishing and their kids and like life. And I was in there trying to impress everyone with this amazing knowledge I had because I thought, well, this is what I need to do to get along with all these men. And I was actually, it kind of came off where he was like, it felt like he was telling me to dumb myself down, which at the time felt really insulting. And it wasn't until years later, and I understood some of the things we're going to share on today's show. What he was really trying to tell me was, Kate, just be human. Like, chill out, woman. Which brings me to the next thing that we don't want to do. The next strategy, ladies, you want to remember is stop trying so hard. That is what I was doing. And I cannot tell you how many clients that we have worked with, women who are in the C-suite, women who have done amazing things in their career portfolio. And they're saying, okay, Kate, I need to go have a conversation with a male colleague who, tends to be someone who's tough to talk to, or I need to go have a conversation with a male boss. And I've prepared this PowerPoint presentation and I want you to look at it. And I'm like, well, what? I'm like, wait a minute. You've prepared a PowerPoint presentation? I'm like, that is not what we're doing, ladies. I mean, first of all, how that comes off, especially to a man, is very subservient, right? Like, why are you presenting to him? He's your colleague, or even if he's your boss. If you have a conversation or you have an ask, understand that this person that you're talking to is a human. And what humans do is we talk. Like my husband would never walk in the room with another man and be like, hey man, like I need to ask you for a raise and I've got a PowerPoint presentation and I've done some research out in the marketplace and here's the 15 points I wanted to make to you about a raise, or I don't know, about a project or an ask. He would be like, dude, I need to make more money. I need a raise. And the other guy would be like, oh, how much do you need to make? And Scott would be like, this much. And he'd be like, okay, cool. I'll let you know. Like, I swear to you, ladies, like that would be the conversation. Now, I'm being a little playful. So for all the men out there, I'm not trying to tease or make fun. But what I'm saying is, as women, we tend to way overcomplicate. This is not an alien creature that you need to somehow like show up with a PowerPoint presentation and explain like the language that you speak. It's just a guy. And you just want to go in, and if anything, you want to understand how does that other person need to receive the information. They don't need a PowerPoint presentation, right? Like they need short, sweet, make the ask, move on, and get out. Does that make sense?
It makes a ton of sense. And I also like the fact that you highlighted that it's a conversation. I think so often we think we need to go in with everything perfectly presented and wrapped up in a bow. And when we do that, it's going to be taken as, yeah, you're totally right. And that's not necessarily how dialogue goes. And that's not necessarily how we're going to actually increase our impact. And it reminds me of one of our clients, and she's actually one of the senior leaders at one of the top 4 accounting firms in the world. And when she first joined us, Kate, she was talking about things similar to you. She's like, how do I make an impact? How do I handle these guys who all they care is about attaboys? And I feel like I'm needing to try to make sure that I have an advocate in the group, and I don't. And it was once she realized that everyone is human and that everybody was trying to solve the same business problem, then she was able to come from the place of considering what's the problem we're trying to solve and to have a dialogue about that. So rather than trying to prove her worth, she was operating from the place of possibilities. Then she could ask questions and say, hey, well, how does this relate to the business objective? How does that compare with what we decided to do last quarter that didn't work? And so when she was able to come from that perspective, she was able to seem like she was challenging the ideas on the table, not necessarily the people.
There you go. There you go. And I think, that's so interesting, Jadine, because as women, like this is where the suffering for success comes in. Like, again, like we work with, a lot of women who are in tech. I think I was mentioning like Dell and Amazon, Microsoft, a lot of women in management consulting, which tends to be, as you get up into that partner level, very male dominated. And it's like, oh my gosh, I work in a male dominated culture. Oh, my life is so much harder. And it's like, wait a minute, you work with humans, ladies. And so what happens is, and this is why this is so important and why understanding human behavior is so important, is you're a human that has all these unique gifts. These guys are humans who have all these unique gifts. We all have the same needs. Okay, when it comes to survival and thrival, and it comes to our basic human needs, you've heard me talk about this hopefully before in other ways, but you have to understand that we are all trying to get our needs met every day as human beings, regardless of our sex, color, creed, sexual orientation, whatever, right? But we have different strategies to get there, right? And so I just gave an example where as a woman, if I'm going to sit down with another woman, I'm going to have a conversation perhaps a little bit differently than I would with a guy, right? Now, again, it depends on the woman, but we're creating patterns here, ladies. So there's some stereotypes, but I might sit down with Jadine and be like, Jadine, how are you doing? How's it going? How's your kids? We might chit chat for a while. Like we may want to connect and socialize a bit. And I'm not saying you wouldn't do that with a guy, but in general, men tend to be a little bit more like, let's just get to the point, right? And so that might be wonderful if that's what Jadine and I do, and that's the relationship we develop before we get into some business discussion, okay? But with a guy, if that's not who they are, and it doesn't mean you always have to mold yourself to what someone else is doing, but what we're saying is, let's not let this get in the way. If being a little bit more like abrupt and to the point is something that a guy can better consume, then just do that. You still get to be you. So I could still walk in the room, let's just say with a gentleman and say, it's authentic to me to want to get to know the people I work with. So I could say something like, hi, I'm Kate. I'm from whatever XYZ place in the world or whatever. Where are you from? Or I could say like, oh my gosh, do you have kids? Do you have littles? Oh, that's wonderful. I do as well. All right, great. Well, let's sit down and chat about XYZ. So I may still just get a little bit of that personal touch in there, which is important to me to get to know someone, but I may not go on for like, minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes until this guy gets uncomfortable. And what's key about this is what I'm doing is all I'm seeing is this is a human. He's trying to get his needs met. He's going to have some slightly different strategies than I do. And that's okay because we need the guys to be like the guys and the girls to be like the girls so that when we come together, everyone is bringing these unique pieces of yourself to, like what Jadine, you were just saying, is like really solve the issue versus being at war with each other. Now, given that, what do we do, ladies, when someone is mansplaining? Like that's a big one. Like if there's a guy talking over you, okay? Well, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to walk in the room and I'm going to see a bunch of humans. I'm not going to see a bunch of men. I'm going to see a bunch of humans, okay? And I know that those humans are all going to act differently in different ways to get their needs met. And one of those humans starts interrupting me. Could be a woman. I mean, women interrupt too, but let's just say the one guy, Bob, starts interrupting me and he starts mansplaining. So every time I say something, he says something, he starts turning to me and explaining what it means. Okay. What happens, ladies, is we get so affronted and insulted and, oh my gosh, do they think I'm stupid? Because why? We're trying to prove that we deserve to be there. And we feel little and we feel small. And then all of a sudden, this guy is supposed to make me feel better about being in the room by not mansplaining. No, it's not his job. His job is not to make me feel more welcome. His job is to get his needs met. That is what he's doing. And we don't know where that came from. Maybe he spent his whole life being interrupted by people in his childhood. And now what he has learned is the only way he gets to, have his voice heard is by interrupting. it's a pattern subconsciously for him. That's all I see. I don't see a guy who's rude to me. I see a guy who has somehow learned a pattern from his past where interrupting is the way he gets his needs met. Or maybe it's the opposite of that. Maybe he grew up in a family where women were you were supposed to explain everything because women had these very traditional roles and men were supposed to be these intellectual, intelligent beings. And that's how he was given value as a child. That's all I see. I'm not mad at him. I'm not going to take it personal. I'm just going to be like, hey, you know what? That's interesting. That's what's going on for him. I'm curious. And then the second time he does it, I am going to say something and say, hey, Bob, I notice that you keep explaining the different terminology and interrupting me at times. I've totally got this. Do you have some concerns about, does it look like I'm not catching on fast enough? Do you have some concerns about, what's going on here? And he's like, oh, no, God. Oh, I'm so sorry, Kate. No, I apologize. I just know that you're new to the board and I wanted to make sure you were up to speed. Like usually when you catch someone in it in a really delightful, calm, curious way, they immediately swing back around. JD, what's been your experience?
I agree with you. And I think to what you're saying, having the confidence and the courage to be able to have some of those conversations. And let's be real, there are differences between men and women. We're not saying that there aren't. What we're saying is be aware of how much you feed into what those differences are. Because are those beliefs serving you or are they not serving you? So Kate, to your point, if you feel like, oh my God, I'm going into a room full of men and I need to prove myself, you're putting yourself in the position of you're not driving anymore. Whereas when you're considering them as human beings and you're aware of the value that you bring to the conversation, then you're operating from a different perspective. So then you can have those honest conversations like you're talking about and not feeling like you're disrupting the ability to collaborate with that other person.
Yeah, I think that's so key because, I was just sitting here sort of reminiscing because I've worked just like you have, JD, and I've worked with a lot of like men only teams. I've worked with mixed teams. Now we have a mixed team, in our company, but for a long time we were a women only team. And so for me, it's like I've worked with all different teams and there's not been one, like, do I work better with women? Do I work better with men? I work better with humans who were aligned around a goal. Like that's for me a big thing. It always has been. But I will say like, one of the things I think as women that we forget in having these authentic conversations and being curious is you bring something valuable to the table, ladies, when you are opening up these dialogues. Now, again, we're not doing it like, okay, men, we need to sit down and have a talk about how we're going to start communicating. That's like saying something to your spouse where you're like, we need to have a relationship talk. And men are just like, oh my God, like they're running the other way. Because I think a lot of times as women, another thing that we do that's incorrect is we want to have some big emotional conversation about how we need to work together as a diverse team. And this is what everybody needs to do. And you can do that, ladies. You can do it. Every guy is going to come to the table and go, yeah, totally. That sounds great. Let's all start speaking together that way. And then they're going to right back the way they were before. And then you're going to be frustrated, feel devalued, feel like nobody cares about you and your voice isn't heard. And it's because you're presenting it in a way that is just not how human beings work. People don't react to PowerPoint presentations or to these big, long dialogues about how we all need to change our behavior. And then everyone changes. People change in small little bits. When you change, they change to you. So for example, one of the things I used to love to do, I worked with a bunch of aerospace engineers at one point. I also worked with a bunch of biologists at one point. They were all dudes. And here's Kate with her little kitten heels. And I had like a spiral notebook because I'm not super techie. And they were all like, they had like, I don't know, whatever, computers. And they were running around in all these like cool clothes and blah, 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 and like really casual. And I would always walk in the room and we'd be having a business meeting and someone would throw up an idea, one of these guys, and I'd say, how do you feel about that? Now, did you guys hear the difference? I didn't say, what do you think about that? Or, oh, that's a great idea. Or, yeah, let me tell you my idea. I wasn't trying to jump in and prove and establish. I was saying, how do you feel about that? And the guys would kind of look at me and I'm like, no, seriously, how do you feel about that idea? What does it feel like if that thing happened? And it forced these guys to look inward and go, oh yeah, that's a crap idea. Or it would force them to go, gosh, Kate, you're right. I feel this is like a great direction that we've banged out in this meeting. And I'm like, cool. And I would be the person that would give them all a high five. Or, if I bumped into them in the hallway, I'd be like, how's it going today? And they'd be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I'd go like, oh, high five. Like, as women, again, we get to bring some level of emotion into the room, It's a value and a skill set we bring, not emotion in this big juggernaut, but in asking people, how do you feel about this? Because business at the end of the day is a human organism, right? And that human piece has to come out.
To the point about the difference between men and women, this is the permission that typically women give to a group. What we know is that typically what have been thought of as female leadership characteristics, like being more empathetic, talking about emotion and what have you, those are needed by human beings in order to tap into the strongest power within us. And so we need to remember as women too that a lot of men have been wanting to be able to lead from that perspective, but they don't feel like they necessarily have permission to tap into those sides of themselves either, because then they'll be seen as not as strong, or how come they're not leading with, the sort of conviction that other typical men behaviors wanted them to operate by. So when we get to operate from this human perspective that you're outlining, we're giving permission to everyone to actually think and to feel, to use your point. And often that's the best thing that we as individuals can add to a situation, is asking those great questions.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story. One of our clients, Jen, who works at Amazon, she, we're working with her, and she works with all these engineers, right? And she's like, hey, I work with these guys aren't emotional. Like, they're dudes. Like, they want to talk about facts and figures. This is going to make them uncomfortable. And I'm like, okay, great. Go try it. You know what I mean? And I'll get to why she was able to do this in a minute, ladies. But she started going into her team meetings, and they would walk around, and she goes, okay, guys, we're going to start a team meeting with celebrations. What are you celebrating? What are you celebrating in your life? Or, she would do something that was more emotional. And the first few times, everybody's like, what are you talking about? And so she would start and she goes, Kate, the first time I did it, she said, I'm celebrating. And she would bring something up like, my daughter, is doing blah, 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 whatever. And the guys would be like, oh, okay, that's what you want me to do. To your point, Jadine, they needed permission and an example of what she was talking about. And then they would do it. And now it's one of their favorite meeting times. Now she gets notes from these guys, emails from these guys going you are one of the favorite bosses I've ever worked for. I've never felt so empowered working for you. I've never felt like my voice could be heard. They're trapped in their societal's expectations of them being a dude. And so instead of us sitting there going oh my gosh, I work in this male dominated environment, it's going to be so hard. These guys aren't going to like me. These guys are going to be so tough on me. It's go unlock them. Now, how do you do that is this. You have to work on your emotional consistency. Jadine mentioned something earlier, and Jadine and I both, I know, are aligned with this, which is confidence, ladies. That is not a state of being. That is going to come and go. Okay. And when I'm constantly talking with you guys about human behavior, it's because the key to operating at a very high level in your career, where you have a demanding, well-paid, highly successful job, is that you have elevated to have a new understanding and operational code for yourself emotionally and mentally. Because what everyone wants to do is they want to go to strategies. Kate, what should I say to my male boss? How many times should I meditate a day? Should I run or should I take yoga? And I'm I don't know. Do all of it. I don't care. Those are external strategies. That is not you upgrading how you live your life emotionally and mentally. So when I give an example of how I walk into a room of aerospace engineers with my little kitten heels and my notebook, and I don't feel intimidated, nor am I being the, BITCH in the room, right? I'm just walking and being me, able to say, how do you feel? That's not necessarily confidence. That is me having developed the emotional self that says, I'm not worried about me in this room. I'm here to make sure everyone else and I are having a discussion around a point in a common goal. So I am working on my emotional self, and that upgrade is essential, because if not, what happens is you walk in the room going, where do I sit? Should I sit next to that guy? What does he think of me? Oh my gosh, he looked at me cross-eyed. I don't think they really like me. Gosh, how come I didn't get 5 minutes to talk on the agenda and my name's not here? We sit here and all of a sudden we're spending all this time as women festering and festering and festering about ourselves. We're inward focused because that emotional consistency is not there, because we don't have a great enough understanding of our own human behavior to go, okay, I can't keep operating this way. I have to operate from a place of greater emotional knowledge, right?
And it takes a while to get there, Kate. I think that's the other thing is oftentimes we're given this feedback of, oh, you should be more assertive, or to your point, watch where you sit, or you should say this phrase. So then we're trying to stack on these strategies on top of not having our own self-worth full, and not truly understanding the evidence that supports that we already are valuable for who we are. And so then we're trying to remember things, and then we feel like we're put in the spotlight and it all falls apart. And then we wonder why we can't perform. So the point here is you can learn how to do all of that, but you need a system that helps you to do, as you've just mentioned, to focus internally and know how do you bring your skills to your consciousness so that you can actually retrieve them when you need it. And that helps you to operate from a whole different level.
Yeah, the knowledge of human behavior and and the self-knowledge far beyond a personality test or a 360, ladies, is gold. It is absolute gold if you're going to operate at this level. Again, average Jane could probably get away with whatever society has taught her. You want a big career, you want a big life, you have to understand how to walk in the room as the person you need to be so that you can, influence these things and not have yourself festering all night long.
Kate, to your point, from training Olympic athletes, athletes never rely on their confidence, because what they know is confidence is slippery. Some days you have it and some days you don't. So as coaches too, we never rely on that. So what we do is we teach them how to be who they want to be. So they learn, what does it mean to be an Olympic athlete? All of the components of that. And once you know who you want to be, then you start to learn, how do I tap into that energy and that perspective when it's needed most?
Yes. And then, ladies, you walk in the room wherever you want, you drop the mic, you be you, you navigate whatever situation is, and then you go home and, enjoy a latte or whatever it is you do in your personal life. And success is no longer a burden. It is just this beautiful thing that we are so privileged to get to experience. So ladies, we do not want you suffering if you work in a male-dominated environment. And here's how we can help. Our team has set aside time to speak with you personally in the next 72 hours, how you can apply these ideas to your career starting right now today. It's a 45-minute conversation. It's absolutely free. And on the call, what we'll do is we'll talk about what's working in your career, what isn't working, and what you can do to operate with total freedom. The call is confidential, right? It's a rare opportunity to speak to an expert who has literally walked in your shoes and knows exactly how to solve for what you're dealing with. The women we speak to tell us all the time, Kate, this is the best thing I've done for myself and my career in years. So ladies, we don't want you suffering for your success. So go to goodlifeinstitute.org/call. That's goodlifeinstitute.org/call. Find a time that works for you and book it. And listen, if we are a good fit to work together, then we're happy to share what that looks like. And if not, that's fine too. So go to goodlifeinstitute.org/call, grab a time that works for you, and we are delighted to speak with you about how you can authentically show up in a male-dominated environment and thrive and not suffer for success 1 second longer. All right, so that is it for today's show. We look forward to seeing you next time. Hi, thanks for tuning into today's show. If you want to subscribe, you can do that by clicking the little picture of me over there. If you want to book a breakthrough call, which you absolutely should do, you can click the button below or go to goodlifeinstitute.org/call to book an appointment to speak to us. I'll see you on the next show.